Ways gobos! Sneaky, cunning, and brutal, Skarsnik has no doubt been blessed by Mork, and leads the green hordes of the Crooked Moon tribe in plundering the old world. But first he must take Carrick Eightbeaks back from devious mutineers and filthy stunties, feeding them all to his pet squig Gobla. Limited to goblin and monster units until he takes the Carrack, Skarsnik needs to use all his deviousness and tricksy traps to beat his foes. Starting out with a free goblin big boss, as well as night goblin fanatics, the Squig Hoppers, and the dreaded Arachnarok Spider, Skarsnik has one of the strongest early game lineups of any faction, and he'll need it, because his gobos sure aren't the bravest of lads, at least not until the unique building at Carrick Eightbeaks is completed. Fortunately, they're 40% cheaper than normal, and his heroes can conduct actions more often and gain experience at a cracking rate, meaning they're some of the best gobos in the world. So let's go, lads! The Warlord of Eight Peaks is calling, and Gobla's hungry. So here we are in the Southern Grey Mountains, starting out our campaign, Carrick Asgaraz, as Skarsnik's Crooked Moon. And the usual disclaimer right off the bat, everything in this tutorial is based on my experience in Very Hard and Legendary, so some things might not be as important to prioritize on lower difficulties, but everything should apply no matter which difficulty you decide to do or to play at. Furthermore, this guide is not really going to be covering the other greenskin factions. It's not going to be covering the greenskins. It's not going to be covering the Bloody Hands. If you are interested in those factions, then be sure to check out the greenskin tutorial. And the Bloody Hands will be getting their own tutorial shortly after this one. That is the next one in the works for sure. Yeah, so without further ado, kind of hopping into things with a quick rundown of the objectives. The objectives are practically identical to your greenskin objectives. For short campaign, you simply need to conquer Carrick Eightbeaks, beat all the other orc factions, loot or occupy or raise or sack 25 settlements, which is you will do in the course of completing your other objectives. You need to earn 7,500 with raiding. If you're not usually if you're not a person who usually takes advantage of raiding, this might be a little harder to keep track of. But given that the orcs camp stance, or in this case the goblins, I guess, in camp stance, does double as a raiding stance, it's not that hard to deal with. You have to destroy the Empire and Dwarves just like normal greenskins, but you also have to destroy Clan Angrand, which is the unique requirement for Crooked Moon. If you're doing long victory, then the differences aren't really serious. You have to destroy or raise or occupy, whatever, 50 extra or double the settlements, so 50 instead of 25. This is once again something you're probably going to complete even in the course of this short campaign. This really isn't too hard. Same requirements for who you have to destroy. However, you do have to occupy all these dwarven settlements, which can be a little tedious because these three, Krakadrak, Kazad Bord Krag, and Syuktraken, are all up in the north. And then finally, you do have to earn 15,000 from raiding, but orcs are a pretty raiding heavy faction, so this isn't necessarily the hardest thing ever. So pretty simple campaign victory requirements. On to strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to try to do this in a bit of a different format. Before, I've kind of done strengths and then weaknesses as two separate entities. This time around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply go through different categories and do a comparison of what's good and what's weak about each category. So economy, heroes, that sort of stuff. So first and foremost, issue of economy. A lot of this game simply revolves around economy. If you can fund armies, then you're set. If you can't fund armies, then you're doomed. So orcs, of course, are in this case Crooked Moon, but the Greenskin faction has very weak home-based economy. They don't have access to trade. They don't have access to luxury resources. The only thing they have access to is they do have a handful of gold mines and diamond mines they can control, but all of those, in the case of Crooked Moon, are out in the very far away. Those are in the east, and so their home-based economy is very weak, and their general income buildings, the hordes or the piles of shiny stuff up into the hordes, are don't make as much money as other factions' income buildings. So all in all, and neither do your ports, none of that stuff. So basically, you're very weak on the home-based income front. So you have to compensate with other ways. Raiding, sacking, looting, those are the main way. Raising, those are the main way. Well, raising doesn't make you money, but those are the ways you can make money and or supplement your money. And so their economy can be actually pretty decent if you're on top of raiding. If you're on top of looting, you can spec into your lords into that, though it is a little more difficult with Crooked Moon. And you can spec into Mob Boss, which is very helpful. That will reduce upkeep of all your units. And Skarsnik's armies, of course, already are 40% cheaper if you're fielding Gobos. So just very, very, very. Their economy is not bad. Their economy is definitely pretty solid. And given that your armies will be mostly goblins, it's actually relative to how cheap your armies are. It's going to be a pretty cost-efficient economy. It's going to be very stable. Going on to technology, the technology is pretty atrocious. It's greenskin technology. Some of it's a little more applicable because some of the unique goblin techs that you don't normally, or technologies that only really affect goblin units, are much more useful for faction that only really fields goblins, and maybe a handful of monsters. So things like weapons strength for you can use with spears, given that you're probably going to be using goblins. This is a bit of a boost, but otherwise the technology is still pretty bad. You want to be prioritizing enormous loot cart, Arachnox Spider, and Goblin Doom Diver. You'll pick up big gun bullies along the way. Oh, that was a bit of an error there. Big gun bullies along the way, and then you probably spec into artillery pieces because that is really what your best support unit, and you're not really going to be investing in chariots or really spider riders. So their technology is pretty bad. There's no way around it. For heroes and lords, their heroes are decent. They're the same heroes that greenskins have available: goblin big bosses and shamans and orc shamans. And so they have two decent lores of magic available: lore of Big Wa and Little Wa, which is very nice. And their big bosses are very easily accessible. And your hero actions are actually a lot cheaper. They're 50% cheaper. And your heroes gain experience at double the rate of normal heroes. This can make it very easy to spec your goblins up into assassin and then start specking into combat stats, and it lets you get all the magic you require just a little quicker on your mages. So their heroes are definitely a pretty solid feature of their faction. So they are not, I would say, stellar. It's not like they stand out because they're kind of mediocre, but they're definitely not a bad feature, and you're definitely pretty hero spam reliant compared to other factions. It's a little bit like vampire counts in a sense, because you will, especially big bosses, you'll probably be fielding in pretty large quantities. Your lords are, as far as combat is concerned, pretty atrocious because you are relying on goblins. Your best bet for a lord to make those goblins competent is Night Goblin war bosses. Unfortunately, Night Goblin war bosses are pretty pitiful combatants. Even if you put them on a squig, they're nothing special. They're pretty mediocre. Normally for orcs, I recommend Goblin Great Shamans or Orc War Bosses. Well, I don't recommend Great Shamans ever, but normally I'll recommend Orc War Bosses. That's not really good because you have a whole bunch of skills, and this is really where your leaders will shine. They have very good battle effect skills and very good campaign effect skills. So we're kind of going to tie this into the armies, and your armies are on paper very, very garbage. You don't have access to orcs until you take Carrick 8 Peaks, or if you want Savage Orcs, if you take Ikran or the Western or Southern Badlands, you will get access to Savage Orcs, which means your army has a very low morale. Goblins are not known for good combat stats. They're very easily broken, especially on higher difficulties where your morale is in the tank to be even more so than normal. But nonetheless, your armies are actually pretty decent. Now, there's two things. One, they're very cheap, so you can field a lot of armies, much more easily than any other faction, because you'll be fielding hordes of goblins. You will actually keep fielding goblins right after you've taken care of KPs. You will basically never field a lot of orc-based armies. New armies are absolutely terrible for Crooked Moon. They're very pitiful. But once leveled up, your armies are some of the best, and especially some of the most cost-efficient in the game. And why is that? Well, it's because of your skills, your lord skills. You should definitely be specking into these, but if you combine the Gobos with Savages and with Beta Knight Sneak-In, your melee infantry will have absolutely ludicrous stats. The charge bonus displacing only plus 20% is in fact a flat plus 20 bonus. So you have a plus 40 bonus once Beta Knight Sneak-In and the Gobos stacked on top of each other, as well as plus 36 melee attack. Your Nasty Skulkers will be absolutely brutal. Your normal Goblins will be absolutely brutal. Take Drippin' Tips to get poison on all units in your army, and you don't actually have to concern yourself with fielding Night Goblins. So you can field dirt cheap normal Goblins, dirt cheap Nasty Skulkers, and Goblin Archers for a little bit of support, a little bit of artillery here and there, and you can simply drown your enemy in units that are very glass cannony, but they do dish out immense amounts of hurt. If you are like Squigs, then you actually have a unique tech at the very end here, Nastier Squigs, and this buff will stack with the Goblin buffs when dealing with Squig Hoppers. So your Squig Hoppers will have off-the-charts stats for both charge and melee attack. So this is a very brutal sort of setup. And stacked on top of your bottom line army buffs, especially the mob boss and the wall, wall path allowing you to field a whole bunch of was. It is very you can field a lot of once your armies get leveled up. They are absolutely brutal, very cost efficient, very powerful. So definitely, I don't think the armies are weak to start off with, but once you build up, they are some of the most cost efficient in the game. As far as control is concerned, which is one of the big sort of issues a lot of times, it's terrible. It's a huge issue. Um, Carrick 8 Peaks is a permanent, sort of just like the Grudge for Clan Angren. Carrick 8 Peaks is a permanent -2 obedience until you take Carrick 8 Peaks. Not controlling it is -2 obedience. Of course, goblins or orc war bosses do tend to get harsh, the harsh trait, which causes a -1 provincial control. And on legendary, this is actually not a game I opened up on legendary, but on legendary, your control will be down to -12 just for extorted income at difficulty level, and because it's -8 for the difficulty level, and stacked on top of events, it's going to be -14, which is incredibly hard, difficult to undo. It means that even more for other green scene factions, getting the obedience buildings is absolutely critical. Fortunately, once you get Skarsnik's Spotter, which is a item, though Skarsnik's only unique item, you will get +5 obedience, and of course, once you take Carrick 8 Peaks, your obedience will go up by 2, so it becomes much more respectable at that stage. One of the nice things to mention about military tech is that you don't actually have to level up your basic barracks past tier 2. Unless you really want stock from the Night Goblins, it's simply not worth it. Skulkers, archers, and goblins with drip and tips providing poison are perfectly competent and perfectly adequate for your purposes. Touching on a few other things, as far as positioning goes, the positioning for Carrick 8 Peaks is pretty atrocious. You're centered up in between Bretonnia, Wood Elves, Empire, and Dwarves, all of whom potentially hate you. You will be under a lot of pressure from Angrand, from Crooked Moon Mutanusgits, which are one of your core enemies. You will often reach the Greenskins or Bloody Hands too late to confederate them, so you can't really count on getting the legendary lords. Though, to be fair, it's not very important to get those legendary lords because you'll be feeling so many gobos. Having to field a lord who doesn't buff goblin units all that well is not really worthwhile, but it is something to keep in mind. That can be rather difficult with Skarsnik. Otherwise, that's practically it, strength and weakness wise. So yeah, we'll be oh, one more thing which I forgot to mention is garrisons, and your garrisons are terrible. Now, granted, they are huge garrisons. You can see when maxed out, it's an extra 10 it's an extra 8 units on top of a garrison that's already very sizable because it's all goblins. So your maxed out garrisons are somewhere around 20 units. It's 8, 14, 18, 19, and you have 19 units once maxed out, but most of these units are pretty atrocious. It's only going to be a handful of trolls, and the rest is going to be night goblins, and because these night goblins are not buffed by those crazy lord buffs, they're going to be very pitiful. They will get more leadership once you take your Carrick 8 Peaks unique building. They'll have +20 leadership, but other than that, they will be atrocious, and your garrisons are definitely not something to count on. They're something that you just build the walls to hold the tide of enemy troops back. So without further ado, kind of going into actual gameplay for Carrick 8 Peaks. And there are two strategies, just like with Angren, there are really two strategies you can do this. One is a slow and steady strategy, and one is a rush for Carrick 8 Peaks. Unlike Angren, though, you are not pressured to take. You are not really very pressured to take Carrick 8 Peaks at all as Skarsnik, unless that -2 control is something that you absolutely cannot deal with, and you're desperately worried about. You really don't need orc units. Your goblin units will be heavily overbuffed from your lord upgrades. Your starting roster is more than adequate to survive in the early game, especially because you get an Ragnarok Spider, which is ludicrous. It's a very powerful unit. In my opinion, this is the strongest starting unit of any faction in the game. This is definitely solid. So you're not too pressured to rush for Carrick 8 Peaks. You can, and it might be a smart move on Legendary or smarter move on Legendary where you're more under pressure from control perspective. But you could slow and steady is what I would recommend. I would recommend it on any difficulty, and it's simply much more conventional and it's much easier to deal with. But I will go over both strats here. I've conducted both. I simply prefer the slow and steady one. So first and foremost, though, there are some similarities between the two. And obviously the start is very similar. So to begin with, you need to get control of the Southern Grey Mountains, your starting province, just so that you can get a little bit of income, get some production going, knock out some of your main enemies, beat off Angrand and that sort of stuff. So first and foremost, there is a cheese strat. I'm actually going to go over this real quickly because now I'm not the biggest fan of cheese strats, but this is a pretty useful one that can help you win very quickly. When you conduct this cheese strat is to knock out Carrick Norn very easily, and what you do is you recruit a lord. It doesn't matter what kind. Well, it should be a Night Goblin war boss. You load up your you load up your goblin there, your big boss, underway over here with Skarsnik without building any troops, and at turn 2 you will begin besieging Karak Norn. In the meantime, this new army you build starts building up. While you're upgrading your barracks up to tier 2 and you're building a pile of shiny stuff. Your first 2 rounds of units should all be Goblin Spears. After that, I would move on to Nasty Skulkers. Against Dwarves, you do not want a heavy skirmish presence. You, in fact, will not want much of a heavy skirmish presence at all with Skarsnik unless you're going into fights against Empire. Because Dwarves are slow, you can easily run down their skirmishers, and your skirmishers cannot go toe-to-toe with Dwarf skirmishers in any way, shape, or form. Against Empire, you will want some Goblin Archers to zone away Pistoliers, which is the key reason to run them. But otherwise, your Archer support should be minimal. Maybe 3-4 units. Your best bet again is Grudge Throwers, or not Grudge Throwers, Rock Robbers, and otherwise you're just better off not bringing too much ranged presence in general. So you at turn 2 you begin sieging Karak Norn. Your enemy will dart out and chase you away. You can't engage here with this sort of army, and you just keep rinsing and repeating. You keep sieging him. This army will never build up. Once this stag is complete, you jump the curb over here, you take Karak Norn in an additional turn. So around turn 10, you should have control of Karak Norn. And then from there, it's an easy swing down south to take Grimhold. And that will give you total control of Stone and Grey Mountains. If you feel this is not your cup of tea, you can go slow and steady. You can build up Skarsnik's army. You can raid Helmgart, for example, or sack Montfort, those sort of things with Underway to make some quick money. That is definitely an option. And sort of build up your 2 armies from there, and then try to engage Karak Norn in a more honorable fight. But this will take a lot more micro, and this will take a bit more, I would say, a bit more experience. If you can assassinate enemy lords before engaging with your Goblin Big Boss, that is another major win. It will also help your Big Boss level up very quickly. So, once you've taken all of the Southern Grey Mountains, your next step is taking out the Clan Angrand, because these guys will continuously pressure you. Them and the Crooked Moon Mutinous will be marching in on you and trying to attack you, so your best bet is to hold Grimhold, beat off Clan Angrand. If Clan Angrand is still positioned down south, which they might be if you did this rush strat, this sort of cheesy rush strat, then you can jump the curb and go after Karak Izor, which I believe I kind of pointed in the right direction there. Maybe it's over there, I think, something like that. But you jump over by Grimhold, and you go after Karak Izor. You take Karak Izor out. That will take out the main recruiting structure for Clan Angrand, and from there you can start pushing south. You should have 2 armies. You should at this point have built up Skarsnik's army to full. Obviously, you have Siege Attacker with the Ragnarok Spider, so you can immediately take Karak Norn, and so you should build up Skarsnik's army while this army over here, the army first built up, jumps the curb and goes after Clan Angrand. And your goal is to take the vaults under control. From here, this is where you really start diverging in strategy. If you're going for a rush, and that's what I'm going to go over first because it's a much quicker and faster way of doing things, you build up a stack of infantry. You build up two, possibly 3 stacks of infantry is preferable, or 3 stacks of units is preferable. Most of these should be Nasty Skulkers and Goblins, with a bare minimum of Archers. And then you march straight across country. You underway from the western border, from the Border Prince's territories into the Badlands. March across the Badlands, sack and raid kind of whatever gets in your way. You ignore your home base, and you try to take Karak 8 Peaks. And this is not, there are usually 2 stacks there, or the garrison and a stack, so you will usually want at least 2 armies, potentially 3. Maybe 2.5 armies would be an ideal setup. It really depends on how confident you are in your ability to win, once again. And I think a lot of this depends on experience. For example, for me, I would not bother with more than 2 stacks, but if you are not that confident in your ability to win against a pretty powerful force, there are Black Orcs in there and units like that, then I would definitely recommend taking Skulkers or taking an addition at least 2.5 stacks. One of the cool things you can do early game is try to get a non-aggression pact with the Wood Elves or their subsidiaries, so Argula and all of them. And if you can maintain good relations with the Wood Elves, you can eventually kind of butter them up. They will become your friendly, and they will provide kind of a zone of control here on your west, and hold away Bretonia, and make sure that Beastmen and all those units, make sure they don't really come into your backline. Once you've taken Karak 8 Peaks, it is basically, we'll go over late game in a bit, and so I'm going to go back and go over the more conventional strategy for taking Karak 8 Peaks, or really playing early games clan or Skarsnik. In that case, once you have taken the vaults, you build up, you fortify. Obviously, your building composition is the same as for orcs. It is going to be walls, income building, control building. Because you don't have to level up your barracks past tier 2, if you have buffed up your control a bunch, or if you're confident in your control, then you can upgrade a. You can just leave your barracks in a small subsidiary place so that you don't have to invest in large in one of the subsidiary towns, so that you don't have to invest in a barracks in your main capital city and your provincial capital. Once you've taken the vaults, I would suggest going after Karakern. Try to get opportunistic. These guys do not start at war with you, so if you can sneak attack them. Skarsnik comes with lightning strike, so what you can do is you can build 2 or 3 armies, jump all of them over to Karakern. If they have an army there, they'll often have like 2 armies here, one in the garrison, one normal army. You can lightning strike the army outside with Skarsnik, which then leaves the remaining garrison, the remaining army and garrison at your mercy inside the city. I would not bother going north. Carrick Ziflin can end up hating you. They do start with absolutely terrible relations with you, but they do not tend to be aggressive and pressure you. Instead, just make sure to build up walls everywhere so that you're not going to immediately lose a city. From there on out, you are going to be, if you're going slow and steady, once you've taken the Black Mountains, your next best bet is to crush the Western Border Princes. One of the big things is you want to leave a dead zone, sort of, as a kind of a barricade or barrier away to keep your enemies away. And just to prevent, once you push out for Carrick Peaks, once you have few armies left at home, because of course, just like for Ankland Anger, there are many possible avenues of pressure on your home territories. It is best if you can limit who can attack you and from where. You will have to beat off Crooked Moon Muniscits and that sort of stuff, but then raising all the territories the Border Princes own, sacking, raising them, and then perhaps raising and sacking all of the Tillian provinces is a very good way of kind of creating a dead zone here in the south that you do not have to then worry about. If you're worried about using these guys as a buffer against the incoming Bjornlings, keep in mind that Bjornlings do not start at war with who come along when the main Chaos Invasion hits. These guys do not actually start at war with you when you're playing as Crooked Moon. And this is not something I knew before. I actually only found this out while I was playing through the campaign again recently, and so they don't start war with you, so you don't have to fight them. You can actually ally with them and just let them take all these territories here in the south, become friends with them, and use them as a just support faction. Let them march straight north and fight it out with the factions north of you. Then you simply move eastward. You can't. Well, I do not normally recommend going after the Blood River Valley because the dwarves are usually there and they hate you. So your best bet is to simply jump over here and take the Western Badlands. Gain control of the Western Badlands. Then push east, take the Eastern Badlands, or set up in Valia's Sorrow. Prepare your stacks, and then crush Carrick 8 Peaks. Once you have Carrick 8 Peaks, your unfortunate situation with obedience will go away. If you want Savage Orcs, if you want to make an army of Savage Orcs in Ekrund or in the Western Badlands, you can. And fairly efficiently and very quickly as well. And you can use those to help you if you want. I'm not a big fan of this. I don't really. You generally go very Gobbo heavy when I'm playing Crooked Moon, but it's definitely an option that you should not take off the table. And once you have Carrick 8 Peaks, you're basically playing with the same comps, the same Goblin comps. You will want to rush up the unique tech structure, but we're going to go over that as we go into a late game situation and we discuss how to do Crooked Moon in late game. So here we are. Long campaign is complete, and we are at this point simply but surely conquering the rest of the world. As you can see, I'm on decent terms with the Bjornlings. I actually broke a treaty with them, which got them really angry at me. I'm actually completely, I have a military alliance with the Wood Elves, and our relationship is only improving. As far as my armies go, you can see my compositions. Now, if you start out at late game, when you're fighting Chaos, one of the recommendations I definitely have to make is that if you are making new armies from scratch, you should fill them with Nasty Skulkers and Squig Herds, backed up by some Goblin Rock Lobbers. These are the primary buildings you should really be building. Usually, if I was going to recommend, now you will need trolls to complete the quest for Skarsnik's Broader, but that is it. And otherwise, I would not recommend that building or using trolls at all. The main buildings I would recommend is the Squig Pens, your barracks, your muster fields, and then the Tinker's Workshop. Final option, if you want to field Arachnarok spiders, which you may or may not want to do, that is entirely up to you, is of course Actually, it looks like I don't have them in any of these buildings. I definitely have Arachnox unlocked, but regardless, is the Sacred Spider Grounds. You might want to build this if you want Arachnox. Otherwise, not really recommended because none of these other units are very useful. So your armies against Chaos, if you are building if this is an army from scratch that is not elite, that does not have all the skills available, Nasty Skulkers, Squig Herds, and Rock Lobbers. I would not bother with any other units. You simply need armor piercing. You just need to swamp your enemy. You will generally be taking him with multiple armies at once. If it is an elite army, however, and we'll try to find some, then you can run a much less decent, I suppose, much less decent build. You can see here, you can run some goblins in there, throw some goblins into the mix, run some goblin archers, some Arachnarok spiders, and they will still perform very well against Chaos troops in spite of everything. And still, obviously, though, you will want to largely be fielding nasty Skulkers. You can see many of my armies are practically identical with hordes of Skulkers, Goblins. Not many Squig Hoppers because I got those unlocked fairly late into this game, and so they were not quite ready. So against Chaos, you will definitely want to be fielding large amounts of these armor-piercing units. As you can see, though, the stats are pretty off the charts. I did not invest in any shooting talents. You can see basically everything here has been invested into the combat stats. I can throw an extra point here at the mob boss. Then 29, I get mob boss maxed out, and then finally take wall path. That way I'm fielding a lot of walls. You can see I've got multiple walls running around. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh no, that's not 8. So seven different walls running around, stacked on top of all my armies. And I also have, as you can see, a lot of independent Goblin big bosses. These guys are very highly leveled, and their assassination chances are very high. So, for example, you can use them to simply murder the masses. Chaos and Norska will field boatloads of heroes, as will Vampire Counts for that matter. You can just assassinate them, wipe the map clean of them, get rid of them, and be done with it. You make sure to spec into combat abilities, or particularly offensive abilities. And Assassin, and that is probably the best way to spec your big bosses. Otherwise, your army is goblin based. There's not much else really to say in late game. Once you have taken Carrick 8 peaks, assuming you did this, if you did the rush strat, then you might not even control your home base anymore, or very little of it. So you will need to recover. You will need to rebuild. You will need to take Western Badlands. I would first recommend securing the bottom right corner. I would take Desolation of Nagash as well as the Blightwater, and then move out from there. If you did the slow and steady strategy, you should control already a decent portion out here in the west. Then you have Valia's Sorrow, or Eastern Badlands and Western Badlands. And I would once again secure the south. You will want to take Southern Badlands. You will want to take the Blightwater and Desolation Nagash, and then perhaps take Black Rag before you're done with all of that, just to get access to the gold mine. But once you're done with all of these sort of southern areas, you can start marching north. Take Black Rag. Take Barrag de Wazbag, take Blood River Valley. Don't be too concerned about holding. If you decide to just occupy a place just to quickly heal your units up or something like that, don't worry too much about keeping control of it. The dwarves might come down, they might pressure you, they might fight you. Just let them take the place, let them sack it, let them reoccupy it. It doesn't really matter. I've lost some of these settlements multiple times over the course of this game, and it doesn't really. It's okay. You can always come back and reclaim it at a later point. The main thing is you take Carrick 8 peaks in the entirety of the southern quadrant, and then you can kind of march north. And at that point, you should be fielding a lot of armies. You can take Zufbar. And so yeah. For fighting Chaos, alongside the fact that you want a lot of armor-piercing units, you will also want to make use of things like Lightning Strike or Ambush. These can be very useful. You can actually get decent ambush statistics as well for Goblins without clevering. I would not spec into both of these talents. If you prefer Lightning Strike and are confident in your ability to fight your opponent and kind of an even fight, I would do Lightning Strike. If you're not as confident, I would definitely do Ambush, because Ambush is a little more forgiving, I think, than trying to fight your opponent in an honest battle, just 1-to-1. So yeah, those are the main things. You're feeling a lot of heroes in the late game. You're feeling a lot of armor piercing. If you are going up against Empire, like I mentioned before, and against really mostly just against Empire, you will want to field a lot of shooting units, or at least a decent amount, maybe like 4 to 6 Goblin Archers. And the only reason for these Goblin Archers is to simply zone away enemy cavalry. You can see some of these armies fought more against Empire occasionally. A lot of these armies, some of them are a bit ridiculous in builds because they were simply meant to fight Chaos. But you should definitely invest if you're fighting against Empire. Plus, this was after I'd already crushed Empire a while ago. But Goblin archers are definitely not a bad choice against Empire. And against Norska, if you're fighting them, they're not the worst choice either. Though here I've kind of just relied on numbers to swamp Norska in most situations. So yeah, that is basically it for good old Crooked Moon in the late game. You can field orcs, and one of the buildings I do want to go over real quick is the Carrick 8 Peaks. Has a unique structure called the Defiled Ancestor Tombs, which is of course the tier 5 variant. This is incredibly expensive. It takes several turns to build. It's something like 10 turns for the level 1 variant, and then a similar amount of turns for the remaining variants. Huge boost to leadership for Goblin Art units, plus 20. This is huge. The extra unit experience gain is also very nice. It means that your units are constantly improving, and you can easily get them up to 9 variancy. The fact that it gives you access to orcs is relevant. I would not recommend fielding. I would not recommend fielding orcs at all with Carrick 8 Peaks or with Clan Angrand. It's not. Or wow. With Crooked Moon, it's not worth it. Don't bother with the orcs. Simply field. Simply continue fielding goblins, but make sure to. I would spec into several growth structures, and these have all been scrapped at this point. But before I'd built a bunch of growth structures. In the province, I built several idols to simply quickly level up to tier 5 so that I could get access to this boost to leadership to make your goblin units very competent. And that is, I think, one of the definitely mandatory things you want to go for once you're fighting Chaos in late game. They have a lot of fear and terror causing units. Those characteristics can be very overwhelming, especially against your low end troops. One of the interesting gimmicks, and this is not a gimmick I usually take advantage of, but you can potentially, if you're confident in going 1-to-1 in sort of an underway situation, you can take Tunnel Boss, max it out, and then allow your opponent to intercept you in underway. And especially once your goblins are maxed out, the extra leadership here means that you can easily just crush your opponent in a 1-to-1 matchup in the underway. It's not something you generally do, but it is definitely an option that you can spec into. Just something I think you guys should keep in mind. And yeah, practically speaking, that is it. Field as many walls as you can. Use those walls to mop up side enemies or enemies that are not as important to prioritize. For example, over here in the east, I had my Wa destroy all of the Gormadni, the Baron Schoenling tribe area. And as you can see, I'm just moving my Was. I'm ordering to go after settlements that I'm not too concerned about having my army get to. So yeah. That is basically it for Crooked Moon. I do hope you guys found this interesting. I hope you guys found it helpful as to how to beat what I think is one of the more difficult campaigns in the game, and definitely one of the more unique ones. If you have any comments, criticism, if you have any opinions on what you thought about my new strength and weakness lineup, be sure to post those in the comments, and I'll respond as soon as I can. Next video will be on the Bloody Hands. I will continue doing the Sanctus Reach campaign playthrough, as well as continuing with these guides, and of course once Total War Warhammer 2 comes along, which is in a little under 2 weeks, I will start doing content for that, and definitely doing some playing playthroughs and that sort of stuff. So that is it. I do appreciate you all for watching. I do hope you found this helpful, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.